Greetings. I'm Dessa Goddard, Chairman of Asia Week New York. We're delighted to bring you the latest in our series of ongoing webinars on exciting selected topics in Asian art. Today, we focus on the nuts and bolts of Chinese paintings, connoisseurship, brushwork, and materials, moderated by Asia Week New York's own Elizabeth Hammer, our program and content manager and specialist in Chinese paintings. Asia Week New York is the collaboration of top-tier Asian art galleries, the major New York auction houses, and numerous renowned American museums and institutions. We were originally founded to promote a week-long celebration of Asian art every March, with gallery openings, many Asian art auctions, and numerous museum exhibitions and lectures. In the last 2.5 years, we've now evolved into a year-round platform and hub showcasing our members and webinars like this one, as well as a newsletter and blog highlighting the activities of museums and lectures on important topics in the field. Liz Hammer is well known to all of us in the field of Asian art. She spent many years in the education department at the Met and in the Chinese paintings department at Christie's, New York, and now is the executive director of the Hammond Museum and Japanese Stroll Garden and a senior consultant to Bonhams. She will introduce our speakers for today, and after their presentations, we'll have a Q&A session, and we welcome all of you to put your questions into the Q&A box. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Dessa, and welcome to everybody who's here for a bit of fun with Chinese paintings. First, I'm going to give the introduction to our speakers so that they can just go one to the other more smoothly. Arnold Chang will be speaking first, and he's a native of New York and was a pioneer in the field as the first Chinese paintings department head at Sotheby's, which set him on the course to be, in many ways for decades, the go-to person in the field of the Chinese paintings market in the US. An academic student of Jim Cahill of Berkeley, an art student of C.C. Wang in New York, and the owner of eyes that have seen countless paintings, Arnold's experience in the field is matched by few. As an artist, his paintings are now exhibited and collected throughout the world, and it is from this vantage that he will talk today. Willow Lan is a native of Nanjing, but she is well known to all of us as the director of the China Institute Gallery, a post she has held since the year 2000. Thanks to Willow's vision, perseverance, and relationships, we have all benefited profoundly from seeing many extraordinary exhibitions and works of art on loan from China over the years, art of real importance and revelation. And she has another incredible project underway now, which she will tell us about in a moment. Unfortunately, Joe Scheier-Dolberg cannot be with us today because of a family health concern. As we all know, his work at the Met as curator of Chinese paintings for the past decade, I know, I can't believe it's a decade either, has been innovative, deeply thoughtful, and eloquently articulated and very generous. Although Joe cannot be with us, one of his recent achievements is, and I'll do my best to give a little bit of an update and preview about it. Dr. Matthew Edlund's day job is as a medical expert and practitioner in the field of sleep, rest, and body clocks, with which he endeavors to provide as much help and information as possible. But his participation today is as a collector of Chinese and Japanese art, particularly paintings. Active in this area since 1993 and based in Sarasota, Florida, Matthew has loaned to and worked closely with numerous museums in the US. Examples from his collection are currently on view with Joe at the Met and Willow at China Institute. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Arnold. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and also Dessa, and hello to Willow and Matthew. Nice to see you. So when Liz asked me to give a talk on nuts and bolts of Chinese paintings and gave me about 10 minutes to do that, I thought, well, there's not really much I can do in 10 minutes. But then I thought of another way that I could utilize the time, which is to show you a little video that I made. I guess the one good thing about the pandemic is that all of us have learned some new technology and are used to being meeting on Zoom and so forth. And one of the things that I learned how to do was to shoot a little video with my iPhone and using a tripod ring and light and a remote shutter. So I was able to film myself doing a little painting. And I also learned how to use one of the apps to speed it up. So what we're going to see is a very quick 10-minute MP3 film of me doing a painting. So I'm going to do the live play-by-play, but basically I started with a blank sheet of paper here, and it's hard to tell the size, but it's about 15.5 inches by 17 inches. And I've speeded this up 4 times, so you can actually see me do this little painting. It's not going to be a masterpiece, but in the time allowed, you'll see how one constructs a painting. And you see that I don't use bottled ink, I grind the ink, but you can see the way that my brush works. I don't need a whole lot of ink and a palette, very simple tools. And it's hard to tell from the video, but the way I hold the brush is a little bit unusual. Mostly I'm holding the brush at an angle rather than straight up and down. Sorry that I didn't learn to get my head out of the way, but just ignore that. And you can see that I'm starting out without any particular vision in mind. For this kind of a demo, I'm just going on autopilot. Just remember that with Chinese painting here, we're using a absorbent paper. I'd like to use a little bit thicker paper that has some tooth and some natural fibers in it. And given that you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and that because it's absorbent ink, ink on absorbent paper, you can't erase and you can't cover up. So that tells you that you have to realize that anything that's going to be painted first has to be, or anything that's going to be seen in front has to be painted first. And also anything that's going to remain white or like a waterfall or cloud, something like that, you have to leave the paper blank. So I think rather than trying to explain all this, just take a look, and you'll notice also that I'm using just one brush throughout the whole painting process. And all of these different lines, and when I say lines, I'm talking about lines, dots, textures, all done with the same brush, and it's all controlled by the wetness of the ink and the angle of the brush and the speed of the brush. So here I'm sort of working out the foreground, and it's not like you do one tree at a time. And here I took a little break because I have a remote shutter. I'm able to stop the process and come back right to where we were. So that's enabling me to show this thing really fast. So having done the lower right-hand corner, I now am going towards the middle ground, and you can see already that there's a waterfall forming. And when you're painting a waterfall, since there's no white pigment, you're not actually painting the water, you're painting around the water. So at this stage, I'm just blocking out the basic composition. This is a kind of standard one corner, almost like a Southern Stone kind of composition because of the size of it's like a small album leaf. And you can see that I'm not working on one particular area at a time. I'm working over the whole surface. And so each stroke that you put down affects the entire image. So it's constantly a balancing act where you go back and forth and work in layers, and sometimes wet, sometimes dry, sometimes thick, sometimes thin. So I don't really get into trying to describe these in terms of what kind of a tunfa, what kind of a texture stroke. It's just using the brush to create different textures, and you can see how you work a little bit at a time, sometimes wet, sometimes dry, and build it up this way. And as you do one section, it affects what you're going to do in the next section. And hopefully, when it's all done, it all comes together. So you notice that I left a lot of, there's a sort of middle ground that's blank, and now I'm putting in washes. And the one thing that you learn from experience is that the dry brush, basically the color of the ink doesn't change as it dries because it's already dry. But you see these washes here look like they're pretty dark, but as the paper dries, it lightens up. And I'm using the paper towel there just to make sure that I get some of the water out of the brush, so that now I'm using a drier brush on top. So you can, because you start generally with a lighter layer of ink, and then you can paint over it with darker ink. You can do dark over light. You can't really do light over dark. And so this is all just a visual process. You look at it and decide where you have to add and some little trees. So it's very effective to have this sense of trees here that now you're seeing through the mist. It's pretty magical when it works. And suddenly the waterfall looks like it appears out of nowhere. Add a few trees in the distance. And I think if you watch how the brush is moving, there's always a rhythm to it. It's not just doing, one section at a time. You jump back and forth over the whole composition, and that's how you get in the end a kind of more unified effect. Most of the time, as I said, my brush is held at an angle, but in certain cases, you also can hold the brush straight up vertically. And these are just little accents that create more of a sense of three-dimensionality, and kind of coax the viewer's eye into looking where I want it to go, so that you see a sense of movement, but basically the whole composition is balanced. Then some distant mountains with washes, and you notice it's all done with one brush. It's just a question of how much water I add to the ink. That looks like it's pretty much there. Maybe just add a little bit. Okay, so that looks very dark, but that once it dries, it's going to lighten up. And you see how I had to put that there in order to balance the main mountain form in the middle. So I'm not really starting with an image in my head. I'm just letting the brush take me wherever it wants to go. Those few touches make a difference. The trees come. And these are the little touches that you don't notice, but sort of give the thing, give the painting more life. There we are. When you see it in detail, you see there are lots and lots of layers, but when you look at it from a distance, it all holds together, hopefully as a recognizable landscape composition. But the brushwork itself is of interest. So ideally, every line should perform a descriptive purpose. In other words, to draw something as a description, but the line itself should also have a certain beauty to it. And I think that's it. So I will turn it over to Willow.
Thank you, Arnold. I'm delighted to join Arnold and Dr. Edlund for this webinar. Thank you, Dessa. Thank you, Liz. New York's Asian Art Week is always something special event for all of us to look forward. In coming March of 2023, the Asia Week will be even more special because after several years of disconnection, the first exhibition from China will be presented at the China Institute Gallery. Bada Shanren is coming to town. Let's meet Bada in New York as his masterwork, Flowers on a River, from Tianjin, will be here. China Institute will welcome the Asia Week with its special exhibition, Flowers on a River, the Art of Chinese Flower and Bird Painting, 1368 to 1911, masterworks from Tianjin Museum and the Changzhou Museum. The exhibition selected 59 painters and over 100 pieces of their work to systematically introduce the different styles of flower and bird painting, from the court academic painters, literati painters, to several important painting schools, including Wumen, Changzhou, Yangzhou, Haishang schools. It will cover 500 years of Ming and the Qing dynasties history, from 15th century court academic painter Lin Liang's hanging scroll, Ducks in a Lotus Pond, to the early 20th century Wu Changshuo's Red Plum. And the exhibition will further explore the significance of the flower bird painting and its deeper connections from nature to art and into the Chinese life. Bada or Bada Shanren or Zhuda will be the star of the exhibition. This famous 17th century monk painter, the former Ming Dynasty royal family member, suffered through his entire life for his lost dynasty. His angry birds and fishes and his lotus in hanging scrolls or albums are often seen and remembered by all the viewers. At this time, at the China Institute Gallery, you will meet Bada through a most extraordinary work by him, a rare and a very long hand scroll, The Flowers on a River. The painting size, as you can see from the screen, is about 13 meters long, equivalent to 42 feet. Hand scroll is one of the formats in Chinese painting. However, it is treated as a large piece of work. Usually, painters take serious consideration before they decide to make it. As Bada stated in his colophon, he painted this long hand scroll for more than 4 months, from May to August. That was in 1697. Bada was 72 years old. The painting started from a few stems of the lotus leaves and a half lotus bud from the screen on your right side, the top row, and continued with a blossom lotus pond, rocks, moss, bamboo leaves, river, trees, orchids, mountains. All of this were depicted through different seasons and onto this very long hand scroll. Either from its format or from its organized sceneries, it is with hidden, mysterious messages to state the major events of Bada's 72 years journey of his life. Next one, please. The literature on this masterwork starts from the frontispiece inscribed by Xu Shichang. Xu Shichang was the first elected president of Republic of China who served from 1918 to 1922. He practiced poem calligraphy painting and was active in the collectors' circle in Tianjin after his resignation as a president. His inscription read, 寒烟淡漠，如见其人. It can be roughly translated as, seems like we can see the painter through chilly smoke and the light ink. The second literature is Bada's poem after the painting in a running script with a childlike naiveness. This poem has over 200 words, used the free verse poetic ballad style, 歌行体, which was popular in late Ming Dynasty. In this song-like poem, Bada praised the lotus, recorded his dialogues with the poet Li Bai or Li Bo in his dreams or thinking, and used some historical allusions to state his thoughts and his desires that can never become realized. His poem started with these 2 sentences. Unfortunately, I see it's covered by the screen. However, his poem started with these 2 sentences, only in 6 words. 河上花，一千叶. Flowers on a river, 1,000 leaves. This is why this masterwork gained its title, as well for our upcoming exhibition. The third part of the literature has 2 colophons, one by Xu Shichang, who praised Bada's painting and stated, only Bada can create such a painting with his unconventional character. The second colophon is by Prince Chengqing, Yongxing. Yongxing is the 11th son of Qianlong Emperor and a renowned calligrapher and a collector of rare books and calligraphy manuals. In his colophon, Yongxing quoted a comment about Bada from Zhang Gen's book, Record of Paintings in the Nation, 国潮画真录. By the way, right now at the China Institute Gallery, we have a mini exhibition-like special showcase introducing Chinese landscape painting. And it is include an album by Zhang Gen. Hope you can come to see. You will be surprised to see how good a painting by this art historian. Next one, please. Bada's Flowers on a River is truly a delight. To set up a good composition for such a long hand scroll, he wisely used a slightly S-line, wave-like structure, up and down, which naturally creates a rhythm of movement. Or maybe he even also implied that is how life goes. He also uniquely set the lotus into the landscape background. As said, he was the first one doing so, which not only mixed the categories of a painting, but inspired the creativities in dealing with the space and the composition for the later artists. Of course, for Bada, he had his special reasons to purposely making such composition. Next one, please. Bada's brushwork on this hand scroll is extraordinary. A very good example of energy resonance alive and vibrant, 气韵生动, the highest aesthetic standard set by the Six Dynasties Xie He in his 6 principles of judging paintings. Really, Chinese brushwork is so magical, as Arnold just said, and Arnold just showed his demo. In this section of Bada's work on depicting the lotus, he used the boneless technique applied with different shades or tone of ink, created a lush lotus pond. Though each leaf no particular shape, but overall seems like thousands lotus leaves in different gestures are moving, yielding, and into each other in the wind of summer. From such flourishing leafy contrast, Bada only used simple lines to depict the lotus petals. Please notice those lines are not smoothly enough, but just like the iron wines, 铁线, strong and characteristic. Next one, please. There are more to be discovered and enjoyed through Bada's Flowers on a River with your own eyes. We welcome you to meet Bada in New York in 2023 at the China Institute Gallery. It is a rare opportunity, as this is the first time Bada's Flowers on a River visit this continent and America. The exhibition will open to public from March 23rd to June 25th. We also planned a series of activities through the exhibition, including curators lectures, orchid pavilion gatherings, artist talk, collectors talk, a music night on flower and the bird, and a full-day international symposium on Saturday, March 25th. We are looking forward to welcome you, or probably I should say, Bada will be looking forward to meet with you. Thank you. Now it's over to Liz.
Well, thank you, Willow. And seriously, that is such an exceptional scroll. It will be a delight to have it here in New York with us. Excuse me a second. I do regret that of course that Joe can't be here, and but I do want to kind of give you a little bit of information that he shared with us to give you a sense of what more is coming. It seems like Asia Week March 2023 is going to be the season of the long hand scrolls, as you'll hear in a moment. So the exhibition, Learning to Paint in Pre-Modern China, in which this painting will be shown, will be on view at the Met from February 18th onward, and will feature a newly promised and partial gift to the museum, Wang Yuanqi's Streams and Mountains Without End. This remarkable artwork, the longest surviving hand scroll by Wang Yuanqi, is promised by Joe to knock your socks off. Wang Yuanqi was one of the orthodox masters of the early Qing period. Born in Jiangsu province, he was tutored in painting by his grandfather, the master Wang Shimin. Wang Yuanqi rose to prominence as a court official and eventually was appointed curator of the imperial collection during the reign of the Kangxi emperor. He remained a court official throughout his long career and died at age 73 in 1715. Next slide, please. There should be another. Next slide, please. There we go. And this is just a few snippets of details from this extraordinary scroll. Luckily, Joe is ahead of the game, and he actually, these are his words, online on the Met's website now. And so actually you can see many more images available. But what he really points out what is noteworthy about this painting. Streams and Mountains Without End is the grandest surviving hand scroll painting from the brush of Wang Yuanqi, one of the most celebrated painters of the Qing dynasty. Subtly varied tones of ink describe a vast and constantly evolving riverscape, which unfurls across a hand scroll more than 70 feet in length. So that's almost twice the Bada. Ooh. The painting shows many hallmarks of Wang Yuanqi's typical approach to brushwork and composition. For instance, his layering of brushstrokes and confident interweaving of void and solid. At the same time, a bold experimental quality is evident. Atypical brash contour lines and dotting, along with some particularly daring compositional strategies, make this scroll unusual within the artist's oeuvre. A core aspect of Wang Yuanqi's artistic practice, and of course this is true of all the orthodox masters, was the mastery and creative transformation of a wide range of old master styles. Wang's mature paintings often follow the style of a particular old master, or sometimes combine two into an amalgam. Streams and Mountains Without End does something more ambitious. It cycles through a range of styles in succession, even as the landscape continues to unfold seamlessly. Though the artist did not identify his inspirations here through inscription, as he sometimes did on other paintings, we can nevertheless identify Huang Gongwang, Ni Zan, Wang Meng, Shenzhou, Li Cheng, and many more. To master such a range of styles and to transform them through one's own brush manner was seen as the artistic remit of the early Qing Orthodox school master, and none did so with more panache than Wang Yuanqi. To weave them harmoniously into a single unbroken whole, more than 70 feet in length, represents a tour de force that is perhaps singular within the artist's body of work. And in the top right-hand section, you'll see what many will recognize quickly as collector seals of Emperor Qianlong. The painting was owned by Kangxi's grandson, the prodigious collector Emperor Qianlong, and is published in one of his collection catalogs, the Shichu Baoji Shubian. Next slide, please. Added to this imperial pedigree is the provenance of Luo Jialun, who acquired the painting in the 1950s, and it remained largely secluded in his collection, seen by very few, until recently when his daughters gifted it to the Met. Luo Jialun was a student leader in China's May 4th movement and worked in activist publications of the time. Initially, he was a professor at Beijing University, but then became a prominent government official in nationalist China, serving as Minister of Education and the government's first ambassador to India. A scholar, calligrapher, as you see here in this example of his writing, and poet, he served as president of two major universities, National Central University and Tsinghua University. Luo spent his retirement in Taiwan. Much of his collection of classical paintings is now in the National Palace Museum in Taipei. Over the years, many notable modern paintings, including ones painted for Luo by Zhang Daqian, Gao Jianfu, and Pu Ru, were sold at Christie's to fund scholarships. Most recently, next slide, please. In addition to this gift to the Met, Luo's family donated more than 70 classical and modern paintings, and especially calligraphy, to the University of Michigan Art Museum. And here's an example of one of the not only more noteworthy examples of early calligraphy, but also I see Amy McNair is giving a lecture on the topic online on December 2nd. So have a look at their website. But it really gives us a lot to see, yet another great hand scroll to see in March in 2023. So next on to Matthew, please.
So thank you, Liz. Margaret, I'm going to ask you to put on the first slide, if you would. Okay. And all right, that's the second slide, but we'll get there fast. So anyway, I'm lecturing at Yokohama. It's 1987. And I walk into, let's go to the second slide, please. The National Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo. And I'm hoping to see the other yoga. Nope. If you could go back to what we had originally. Okay. This is fun for people because they basically get to see the talk without my talking about it first. Yeah, let's just hold it there. Anyway, so I walk into the National Museum of Modern Art. I'm trying to see what the Japanese do in Western style painting. And instead, there's absolutely none of it. There's hall after hall of calligraphy. I can't read it. I can't understand any of it. It's similar to the incomprehension and I think the bewilderment that many Americans feel when they walk into an Asian art gallery. So I start looking and I say, can I at least look at this as abstract art? And the answer is yes. So when I get home, I start reading. Now, calligraphy really gets going in the Shang Dynasty, maybe around the 14th century BC. That's when you find oracle bones. Now, this is a script for divination, okay? Words are literally magic. It's not that you have just magical results from painting or calligraphy. Words are magic. They're expressions of heaven. These are the guides of the gods. Now, this calligraphy is by Dingfu Zhi, and he's actually a pointillist painter who is here depicting the magical origins of the character Shou, longevity, in 100 versions. Now, it's probably from the 1930s, but what he's really showing is the magic and power of ancient times. And a lot of these characters are, in fact, from ancient scripts. Okay, can I have the next slide? All right. Words are power. Now, in 221 BC, China is unified under the tiger of Qin, Qin Shi Huangdi, who builds his tomb in Xi'an with its famous terracotta warriors. But his prime minister is a guy named Li Si, who is really one of the great theoreticians of totalitarianism. Now, they've just conquered 7 states. They all speak different languages. How do you unify them? The answer is you get them to write the same language, even if they don't speak it. And that's just as it is today. Cantonese is to Mandarin like Spanish is to English. Okay. So now calligraphy becomes the medium of administration, of bureaucracy, of power. When a few short years later, the Qin dynasty is overthrown, one of its great rebels is a fellow named Chen Sheng. Now, how does he know what to do? The answer is he eats a fish. Now, inside this fish is a letter in red calligraphy declaring that the Qin is over. He, Chen Sheng, has the mandate of heaven. Okay, and I know for certain I've never had the mandate of heaven because I've eaten a lot of fish and out of none of it has ever popped any calligraphy. Okay, so over the next 2 centuries, the bureaucracy sees calligraphy and recognizes it as a major art form. Around 100 AD, you get art criticism of calligraphy as an abstract art form, which is only about 18 centuries before the abstract expressionists. The point is this: brushes have power. But calligraphy is also about pleasure. The example on the right is by He Shaji. He's a famous calligrapher and education commissioner of the 19th century. And he's using his own weird version of a really ancient script to do a Tang Dynasty poem while dead drunk. And he says so. So calligraphy is a performance art. You saw Arnold show painting is very much a performance art. But here, He is having a lot of fun. very inebriated. Okay, can we have the next slide? Okay. Now, eventually, calligraphy turns into painting. Around the 10th century, you find the real popularity of scholar literati art. And what they do is they use the strokes of calligraphy as the strokes of painting. So eventually you develop what is called the three perfections: shuzhui, calligraphy, poetry, painting, talking to each other. You can think of it as a kind of three-dimensional art form on a two-dimensional surface, working as its own sort of grand opera. And you can see really nice examples of this sort of thing right at China's Tube right now. Okay, but this is a very subtle, expressive opera. This shorthand scroll is by Yun Shouping. Yun Shouping is also one of the Orthodox masters of the Qing dynasty, like you just saw that wonderful 70-foot hand scroll of Wang Yuanqi. So he's painting this maybe in the 1660s, and he's showing this lone man in a vast space. Now, is Yun referring to the previous Wu school painting of the century before, or is he describing parts of his own life, where in the chaos, the Yuan-Tole, the fall of the Ming dynasty in 1644, his family has him adopted out by the wife of a Manchu general. And then there's a crazy story of how the family brings in a monk so he can actually return to the family years later. So is this a simple landscape painting, or is Yun painting himself? Okay, can I have the next slide? And no, this is not a Dutch farmhouse by Ruysdael or Hobbema. This is a painting by a court painter, Chen Mei, done in 1730. The West is knocking at the door. The Jesuits have come, and Prince Bi, the future Qianlong Emperor, is the supposed recipient of this painting. How do I know that? Because when he was at Kaikodo, Arnold, who you saw paint earlier, sold a painting by Chen Mei of 1730 of the same subject, but done in a fully Chinese style. Chinese paintings never stop talking to each other. Okay, can I have the next slide? All right, here's a detail. Hopefully you can see it. You've got this well in the middle, some wintry pines, a cute farmhouse, roosters and cows. You can find these in Chinese painting, not just in the West. Next slide, please. Now, brushes also sidle up to power. These small album leaves are now in a show at the Cincinnati Art Museum called Galloping Through the Dynasties. And that was curated by Home Song, who's written a lot about what art and symbolism are about in China. Now, the horse is an ancient emblem of power. They can fly through heaven 1,000 li in a day. They sweat blood. And the best ones come from the West. Now, these album leaves were done for the court, by He Qingtai. He Qingtai's real name was Louis de Poirot. He's one of the Jesuits who thought to get close to power in China by going directly to the top, working for the Emperor Qianlong. Now, Louis de Poirot translates the Bible into Chinese. He's the last Jesuit at the court. And these are his own versions of great paintings of horses done by Lang Shining. Lang Shining's real name, Bartolomeo Castiglioni. Now, the Jesuits do not succeed in Christianizing China, but they do change Chinese ceramics and paintings. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now brushes also vie for power, attempt to attain power. This is only a 30-foot hand scroll by Gang Yuwei, who's known as the George Washington of China. In 1898, for about a month, he and the emperor think they can change China to a constitutional monarchy. Well, we all know how that one ends. But Gang then pays for his revolutionary movement with his calligraphy, okay? That, in other words, calligraphy has values of many, many powers. So in China, great power and great art often exist in the same person. There's no Western equivalent for Gang Yuwei. Huizong, the captured last emperor of the northern Song, captured in the 1120s, is perhaps better known today as a great artist. We remember him for his paintings, his ink-like gold calligraphy. Now, as for collecting glory, the paintings that you saw before of Ho Ching Tai are now being reproduced as 4 refrigerator magnets. Okay. When I get them, I know exactly where in the fridge I'm going to put them. So even in the West, Chinese paintings can exert some kinds of popular power. Okay, next slide. Now, there should be, okay. Yeah, okay. Now, brushes also tap spiritual energy. The Taoists speak of the universe as starting with a single brush stroke. And Arnold showed you what you can do with many brush strokes, but the idea is that creativity, the world, the Tao, can bring all of its power with one stroke. Okay, now one person who fully agreed with a position like this was Chang Da-chien. You heard a little bit about Chang Da-chien before. He meets Picasso in 1956. The 2 great colossi of Western and Chinese painting, they meet in Paris, and Picasso confides to Zhang, if I'd been born Chinese, I would have been a calligrapher. But Chang was much more than an important painter. He was also a great forger, as the British Museum and the Metropolitan know very well. And so what you quickly learn as a collector is that in China, ancient masterpieces are made every day. Okay, now if I can have the next slide. Okay, this is in part because the past is never past. What we were looking at before was the portrait in Tokyo National Museum. If you could flip it back for a second, I'd appreciate it, of the poet Li Bai, okay, who was mentioned in that statement by Bada Shanren that Willow was talking about. So here, Li Bai, 8th century poet, he's done in the 12th century, early 11th century by a great painter named Yuanqi. And you can very clearly see that this piece is not from my collection because it's actually a decent photograph. Now, if we can get to the next slide. Here is Chang Da-chien's version of the same painting done in 1947. He's also doing Li Bai in part in Yuanqi's style. This is something very important in Chinese art, feng, creative interpretation, reinterpreting everything from the past. But if you look at the face of the great poet is now that of Chang Da-chien himself. He has become Li Bai. And I remember a documentary where Zhang says, when I paint, I feel like a god. I am God. For gods and mortals, the past is never past. But really great painters like Bada Shanren, the Bada Shanren that you'll see in March, they can do something else. They can remember the future. Okay, next slide. All right, Westerners don't think of bamboo paintings as self-portraits, but in the 17th century in China, they were. The bamboo is a symbol of the scholar official. He bends but does not break. Now, this is a painting I donated to the Met that they beautifully remounted and which Joe has spoken about before. You can see it now at the Met. It's by Zhang Hong, and it's done in 1686. Now, Zhang Hong is without doubt an Yimin, a leftover subject of the Ming Dynasty. His father and grandfather were imperial censors, the imperial police, often the secret police, powerful men to be feared. But Yang himself is nowhere. He's painting this at the end of his life, and he's depicting himself as living through a hurricane. And if you go see this painting, you'll see it's really a violent painting. In the past 60 years of his life, China has seen multiplying wars, famines, pandemics. It's estimated by the late 1650s that 40% of the population is dead. Now, Yang has lived through all of it, but he's still here. He's still standing up. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, these sentiments are still very present today. At the recent 20th Party Congress, President Xi said, and I quote, We must be ready for high winds, choppy waters, and even dangerous storms. The prospect of chaos, political, economic, social, and spiritual disorder remains of deep concern inside China. But Chinese painting has a lot more to say about everything. Can art let you look at the world afresh? I'd just like to leave you with these ideas. Words are magic. Calligraphy begins as the guides of the gods. Art is still magic, and words are art. It's not just Barbara Kruger. Words, particularly in China, have great force. Painting, poetry, calligraphy, indeed power, all talk to each other. Why? Because brushes have power. And in China, as elsewhere, the past is never past. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Matthew, and the other speakers. So we have a little bit of time for some questions. And I'm sure that while we're getting started with that, Margaret will bring up the rest of the speakers. But good, one of them is here. So here's the rest of them. So reading from the Q&A written in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, do write them there and I'll read them out. John McCann starts, and this is for Willow. And if you'll pardon, I'll make this a little short, but John McCann writes that his father was born in Beijing in 1910, but spent most of his years growing up in Tianjin. Have the paintings, the painting by Bada Shanren, been in the Tianjin collection for a long time? I think, go ahead, Willow.
Thank you for the question. For the detail, I may not give the gentleman a satisfied answer. Though on the painting does have collected by a few people, including Xu Shichang. And Xu Shichang, after he resigned in 1922 and active in the Tianjin's collectors circle, so that time probably the painting was there since he did the frontispiece calligraphy. So that's probably in that period, early 20th century. And besides Xu Shichang, it does have another person, Mr. Xu and Mr. Cheng, collected seals on the painting. Then the painting eventually purchased by the museum in the 50s. So very possibly in the early 20th century, the painting was in the Tianjin collectors circle, because that in that period from the late Qing dynasty to the early 20th century, Tianjin in fact is very active in the collectors circle. So I hope I answered the question.
Willow, if I can follow up with a question of the idea to bring these fabulous paintings from Tianjin and Changzhou, what gave the idea for that? How did that idea come about?
Thank you. In fact, it's a very good question. I would say, first of all, Bada Shanren, as everyone knows, a lot of people fall in love with this painter. It happened more than a decade ago. When I heard this painting, I went to the Tianjin Museum. I don't know the museum people at all, but I just know this painting. So I went there, I requested, I want to see the painting. That is about maybe 15 years ago. And then the museum director just showed me the entire piece. So from that moment, the memory just cannot forget about it. And just about 2017, 2016, Changzhou Museum had a flower and the bird painting exhibition. And also in those couple of years, Nanjing Museum had Qingteng Baiyang's exhibition focused on Xu Wei and Chen Chun. But at that time, people say, oh, if can have Bada's flowers on a river together with Xu Wei, that will be really the treat. However, we do have Xu Wei in the exhibition. Anyway, all of this kind of pounded in my mind. And also, as you all know, China Institute Gallery has been presenting Chinese art for more than half a century. But really, funny enough, we never ever done a flower and the bird painting exhibition. So, but still, as you know, this art format lasted for more than 1,000 years. You know, what's the significance of this painting format? I'm just so curious about it. So start from there, you know, I worked with the Tianjin Museum, Changzhou Museum, try to see if we can do something and let people enjoy and discover the importance of flower and the bird painting. So that is the story.
Well, thank you. It seems that, Arnold, you really hit a chord with, because two people have asked about your comment that you don't pre-plan your composition, but you let the brush go the way it wants. And so this is from David Lane and Ling. They both ask how traditional is that? Is that typical of literati paintings? And then also, or does it connect to Chinese philosophy? Can you say a little bit more about that point of view in light of the tradition?
Sure. It's interesting because the way the question is framed is it's asking me whether this is sort of the way that literati painters worked in the past, and I hadn't really thought about it, but I think my answer is this is my interpretation of how the essence of kind of literati landscape painting differs from a kind of more professional approach. And I think it's different from, seems like I should be, are you seeing me?
Yes.
In this? Okay, good. Yeah, so my idea is that that I know that other painters work in a different way. So it's it's not a question of mine being the only way, but for me it makes the most sense is that I don't have a picture in my head. So I think a lot of artists start with an idea, start with a picture in their head and try to figure out, how do I get what's in my head onto the paper? I actually don't work like that at all. I just look at the paper and start drawing and let the brush lead me to where it wants to go. So I'm using painting as a way of discovering an image rather than having an image that I'm trying to put onto paper, if that makes sense. And yes, in my interpretation, that's the way the great literati painters worked, at least to a certain extent. Now, if you have a 70-foot hand scroll by Wang Yuanqi, certainly you have to have some basic compositional plan, but it's not like you go through and you work it out, all the details, and then I think even in a painting like that, especially in a painting like that, what makes it great is that within each section there is a lot of spontaneity, there is a lot of free form, and a lot of play within the basic compositional structure. And the challenge, especially in a 70-foot painting, is to try to make it all tied together into a plausible composition. So yeah, so I guess that's my answer, and I can't be sure that that's how all literati painters work, but I think the attitude is right.
Terrific, thank you. Matthew, two parts. First, one of our audience asks about the calligraphy behind you, what it says and who it's by. And then also, I would ask you, picking up off of what Willow said about when she saw the paintings in Tianjin and Changzhou, that it just stayed with her. When you think of one particular work of art that you've collected, what one jumps into mind as something that just stayed with you and you sort of had to have it, you had to endeavor to get it over a long period? What comes to mind?
Okay. What's behind me is a calligraphy by Chang, which I and who's also painting his politics. He's blamed by many for losing the war between China and Japan. It supposedly is untranslatable, but people tell me it could mean scholar's studio. And as far as one painting, I'm afraid I can't think of one painting. I will say the last painting that I showed is from the Shanghai School by Ren Bonyan. And that was showed to me by a friend of mine named Edlund. And Edlund wanted to sell that. I think he needed some dental work at the time. But I was looking at it for a long time. And all I can tell you is these paintings talk to you. They talk to each other. You can almost think of them as stories, as novels. And that one just stuck in my mind forever. But if you start thinking about Chinese paintings and you start thinking about brushwork, you'll find that they're all talking to each other because the past is never past. You learn by reinterpreting the past, by changing from the masters and learning from the masters your own forms, your own creative abilities. And in that sense, whenever you have a Chinese painting, you're going to be thinking of it in terms of others.
Thank you. There were a few questions about the installation of the long hand scrolls. And I think probably the best thing is to, well, one that involves Joe, who isn't here to say about what he's going to do. But I think it is good to leave you in a note of suspense and anticipation for what comes in the future. So I think, and maybe I'll give Willow a chance. There we go. I think at this point, we'll thank you all for joining us. On behalf of Asia Week New York, I want to thank the panelists for this wonderful and enlightening presentations. And especially thank you to our audience for joining us today and for the support of the Asian art community. Be sure to visit so for those questions you were asking about rotations and gallery dates, visit our website, Asia Week New York's website and newsletter. And if you don't get the newsletter, do sign up for it, so you'll be up to date with news about our members' galleries, auction houses, and museums. And also don't forget to mark your calendars and plan to be in New York in next Asia Week, March 16th through 24th. On behalf of all of us at Asia Week New York, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night.